He stepped onto our lawn with a clipboard in one hand and a pistol in the other. Said we were violating Code 12B by trimming a tree near the easement. My wife asked one question. He reached for his waistband. But what he didn't know, she's not just my wife. She's a federal prosecutor. Here's what happened. My name's Aaron, and I've lived in this neighborhood for over 6 years with my wife, Marissa. We picked this place because it was quiet, clean, safe. A place where we could settle down after 20 years of bouncing between federal postings and courtrooms. See, Marissa isn't just a lawyer, she's a federal prosecutor, one of the sharpest I know. And while she's taken down white-collar criminals, cartel operatives, and corporate fraudsters, she never imagined the most reckless person she'd ever face would be a man with a laminated HOA badge and a loaded weapon. This wasn't about a tree, or an easement, or a violation notice typed up in Times New Roman. This was about power, control. And what happens when someone with neither real authority nor real sense decides they're judge, jury, and almost executioner? He pulled a weapon on my wife because he thought he could scare us into silence, because he thought we were just another couple who would roll over to avoid conflict. But he didn't know what she does for a living, or what I keep on record, or how much this home and this community actually mean to us. We don't run, we don't scare easily, and we know how to fight back, legally, publicly, and with receipts. Where are you watching from, and have you ever had to stand up to someone who confused authority with power? Stick with me, because what started with one angry man and a weapon ended with a courtroom, a resignation, and a neighborhood finally breathing free again. When we bought the place in early 2019, we weren't looking for anything flashy, just a quiet cul-de-sac. Lounge sack with enough room for 2 rescue dogs, a vegetable garden, and one long exhale. After spending 2 decades in and out of courtrooms, briefing rooms, and hotel rooms, we were tired, both of us. The house sat beneath a row of old sycamores, the kind that whistled when the wind moved right. The porch was crooked, the fence needed sanding, and the roof had personality. But we saw charm, potential. We saw Sunday mornings in the kitchen, planting days in the backyard, and maybe, someday, kids chasing chickens through the lawn. By the end of the first week, we knew the names of our neighbors. Tom and Evelyn 2 doors down were retired forest rangers who made mead and gave it away like candy. Jacob, across the street, was a widower who kept his late wife's peonies blooming with almost sacred devotion. Sandra, next door, was a pediatric nurse with 2 teenage boys and a laugh you could hear through the walls. The HOA wasn't even a blip on our radar back then. They sent the occasional newsletter, mostly reminders about holiday decorations and recycling bins. Nothing major. If you stayed inside the lines, they stayed invisible. At least that's how it seemed. We built a routine fast. Marissa worked from home most days, her laptop always glowing from the corner of the sunroom. I taught part-time at the community college, Criminal Justice 101, and spent the rest of my hours fixing up the place. There's something meditative about rebuilding a deck or rewiring a porch light. When your hands are full of work, your head has time to rest. Weekends were sacred. Coffee on the porch, classic jazz in the background, dogs napping on our feet. Sometimes we'd hear lawnmowers or kids playing. Other times, nothing but wind and time. It was a healing kind of quiet. We planted tomatoes, peppers, and rosemary in raised beds along the back fence. Marissa turned the west-facing plot into a butte, Orfley garden. One afternoon, while we were building trellises for snap peas, she looked over at me and said, "This feels like the first time I've actually exhaled in 10 years. And it did. That's what made it all the harder, what came later. Because peace, when it's real, soaks into your bones. And when it gets threatened, when it's ripped away, you don't just feel fear, you feel rage, loss, a burning sense that something sacred has been violated. We never imagined we'd become a problem. We kept to ourselves, paid our dues, showed up to the occasional HOA meeting when cookies were promised. We didn't cause waves. We liked the calm. And funny enough, Karen wasn't even on our radar. Not yet. She was just the woman with the white Mazda, a quiet, sharp-looking lady with sunglasses big enough to hide behind. She waved from a distance, walked her tiny dog at the exact same time every morning, and never really engaged. I once offered to help carry a bag of mulch to her garden bed. She declined with a polite smile and a firm, "I've got it, thanks." So, we let her be. No need to push neighborliness where it isn't wanted. The first spring, we built a small pergola over the back patio. Nothing fancy, just wood, stain, and patience. The dogs had shade, and Marissa had her reading nook. That's when I added the solar lights, just enough to make evenings glow without drowning out the stars. We even talked about hosting a small get-together that summer. Fireflies, lemonade, maybe a grill. A chance to meet the folks we've waved to for a year, I said. Marissa agreed. I like our little street, she smiled. It feels safe. It did. Until it didn't. It started the week after we installed the rain barrels. I remember it clearly because the weather had been unusually dry, and Marissa, being a certified environmental nut, wanted to do something small to conserve. So we added 2 dark green rain catchers near the back gutters, tucked neatly between the hydrangeas and the rosemary. They weren't visible from the street, they didn't leak, and they matched the siding. But less than 48 hours later, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a single sheet of printer paper. Per HOA Code 7.4.3, all exterior structures must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Unpermitted modifications may result in fines. It wasn't signed, it wasn't friendly, and it wasn't accurate. I reread our bylaws 3 times that evening. The clause in question, 7.4.3, had nothing to do with rain barrels. It referenced sheds, fences, and pergolas taller than 6 feet. What we installed was explicitly allowed under subsection B of Code 9.2.1, which, ironically, the HOA had just updated the previous year. Rainwater collection systems were considered low-impact improvements and encouraged with city incentives. Marissa smirked when I showed her the note. Classic weaponized misinterpretation, she muttered. Passive-aggressive and legally limp. We laughed it off at first, tossed the note in the drawer, filed under "someone has too much time." But then came the drive-bys. At least 3 mornings that week, we noticed the white Mazda rolling past our house unusually slow. Not stopping, not idling, just watching. Always around the same time, always early. One morning, Marissa caught the driver snapping a photo of our front yard, arms outstretched through the window like a tabloid journalist hunting scandal. "Was that?" I asked. Marissa nodded. "Karen." The name wasn't meant to be cruel. It's just what we started calling her, the woman with the white Mazda and the camera phone. We had never interacted beyond a wave, but the vibe had changed. The neutral smile was gone, replaced by pursed lips, arms crossed, that same expression you'd expect from someone measuring your grass with their eyes. A few days later, an official-looking envelope arrived, this one postmarked and watermarked with the HOA's seal. Violation notice, unpermitted L. Escape changes, date issued, June 17, 2020. You are in violation of HOA Code 7.4.3 for installing water collection devices without prior approval. You are instructed to remove the devices within 10 calendar days or submit an ARC form with full specifications and wait for approval. Failure to comply may result in a $50 per day fine. Karen Elbridge, Chair, ARC Committee. And there it was. Karen had a last name and a title. Marissa sat down at the kitchen table and folded her arms. She's not just nosy, she's the one pulling the strings. We could have complied. It would have been easier, faster. But the principle was off. We had followed the rules, carefully, and now the rules were being twisted around us. We weren't about to bend. So we responded. I drafted a short letter, respectfully citing the correct bylaws, attaching a copy of the HOA's own design policy update, and concluding with, "Unless otherwise notified, we will consider this matter resolved." That's when things turned. A week passed, no reply, but the tension changed temperature. Neighbors started acting odd. Sandra, usually warm and chatty, stopped waving. Tom and Evelyn skipped our porch entirely during their morning walks. Jacob, who used to wave from his rose bushes, stayed inside more. It was subtle, not malicious, but noticeable. Then came the weeds. One afternoon, I noticed a few small flags staked along the edge of our side yard. They marked the property line between us and the community park walkway. Attached to one was a plastic tag, "Unmaintained vegetation, possible nuisance, 7.9.1. That patch of grass hadn't been an issue since we moved in. It was city land. I mowed it regularly, but suddenly it was our responsibility and a potential nuisance. And the source? You guessed it. The complaint had been filed anonymously, but the note in the HOA email thread contained a familiar phrase: unpermitted modifications, same wording, same cadence. It was Karen again. By now, Marissa was starting to keep records, screenshots, letters, meeting not, as to everything digital was printed and 3-hole punched. We weren't being paranoid, we were being cautious. Because the pressure was building, and we knew enough from years in federal service that when someone like Karen starts small, it's rarely where they stop. Then came the final straw. It was late July, just past 7:30 p.m. Marissa was watering the butterfly garden, headphones in, lost in her own calm. I was inside grading final papers for my summer course. She didn't hear him approach. Karen's husband, Mark Elbridge, had apparently been assigned to check on easement violations along the side of our property. He claimed he was acting in an official HOA capacity. He was not. And when Marissa stepped out from behind the trellis and startled him, he turned, fast, and reached for his hip. She froze. He didn't pull the weapon, not all the way, but he gripped it, let her see it, made sure she understood he was armed. There were no words exchanged, just a sharp, loaded pause. Then he turned, walked back toward the Mazda, and drove off. That was the moment we knew. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. This was intimidation. This was calculated. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. After the incident with Mark, everything changed. Marissa didn't tell me right away. She came inside, pale, calm, too calm, said she needed to file something. Then she pulled out a yellow legal pad, opened her laptop, and started typing furiously. When I asked, she gave me the facts like she would in a deposition. Time, 7:33 p.m. Subject, Mark Elbridge. Event, approached property under HOA pretense, placed hand on concealed weapon, made no verbal contact, departed. No emotion, just detail. But her hands were shaking. That night, we filed an incident report with the city and a statement of concern with the HOA's general counsel, bypassing Karen entirely. We also submitted doorbell cam footage, time-stamped and dated, showing Mark pacing along the side of our yard moments before confrontation. The HOA's reply? Silence. No investigation, no response, not even an acknowledgement. 3 days later, a violation packet arrived by courier, hand-delivered, signed for. 7 separate citations, all dated within 48 hours of the incident. Unapproved plantings near the fence line. Obstruction of common path, a tomato cage no less. Exterior lighting installed without permit. Excess signage, our small pollinator garden sign. Grass exceeding regulation height by 1/4 inch. Unauthorized water catchment devices, again. And, most absurdly, behavior unbecoming of community standards. That one wasn't even tied to a code, it was just a phrase. The fines, $50 to $100 a day, per violation. Suddenly, we were looking at a potential $500, $700 per day in penalties. Retroactively applied. It was absurd, illegal even, but that wasn't the point. The point was pressure. They want us to flinch, Marissa said, flipping through the violation packet. They want us to sell, to leave, or to break so they can come after us harder. She was right. Because this wasn't just Karen and Mark anymore, it was the full weight of a small, corrupt system turned inward on one target. Within a week, the social shift was complete. Neighbors we used to chat with started looking through us. The invitations dried up. Conversations paused when we passed. Someone created a thread in the HOA Facebook group titled Maintaining Standards, Why It Matters, filled with vague complaints about certain homeowners, threatening community values. They never used our names. They didn't need to. The HOA newsletter began publishing reminders that read more like warnings. Please remember, security patrols are authorized to approach properties in violation of RC code. All homeowners are expected to demonstrate respectful demeanor during all interactions. Non-compliance will be handled XP, editiously. There were whispers of more fines to come. One morning, we found a letter in our mailbox with no return address. Cut from newspaper headlines, like a ransom note. Leave before someone gets hurt. We gave it to the police, filed a report, still nothing. Meanwhile, the HOA began fast-tracking complaints that previously wouldn't have made it past a recycling bin. A rust spot on our mailbox became a violation. A bent garden stake? Visual hazard. Too many guests one weekend? Exceeding quiet use limits. It felt relentless. And yet, when we looked deeper, we started noticing a pattern. The complaints were being submitted anonymously, but all of them passed through the same hands for enforcement. Karen. She had elevated herself from committee chair to unofficial enforcer, rubber-stamping infractions, dispatching Mark to observe, and manipulating bylaws that she and 2 board members quietly rewrote in April, months before this began. Yes, we discovered that too. Marissa filed a public records request with the city and discovered that a small bylaw revision session had taken place without notice or public vote. Just 3 HOA members present, 3 signatures, and all the new rules? They matched our violations perfectly. The code about rain barrels? Added. The language about signage? Brand new. Even the unbecoming behavior clause? Slipped into an appendix. It was clear, we weren't breaking rules. The rules were being rewritten to break us. But why? Why us? That answer came, fittingly, in the form of a real estate flyer. A house down the block went up for sale. Standard listing, but with one interesting detail. A red star printed on the map, right where our house sat. It was labeled, Undeveloped Opportunity Lot. I called the listing agent under a fake name, asked about the star. She said the HOA had been in talks for months about reclaiming certain parcels to open up space for communal enhancements. The star lots were problematic homes that the HOA wanted to see turned over. Clean slate. Marissa stared at the flyer like it was a smoking gun. So that's what this is about, she said. They want the land. It made 6 cents. Our house sat next to the park trail. If we left, the HOA could buy cheap, demolish, and expand the park, adding a pavilion or a second parking pad for events. It would raise surrounding property values, create communal prestige, and guess who ran the Green Growth Subcommittee? That's right, Karen. She wasn't acting alone. This was about money, influence, control, and we were in the way. But here's the thing about pressure. It either breaks you or it hardens you. We chose the latter. Because while they were busy fabricating violations, we were gathering evidence. Marissa compiled a legal folder thick enough to collapse a desk, complete with timelines, inconsistencies, fraudulent citations, audio clips, and public records. We reached out to other homeowners, quietly, and found 4 more who had been pressured in similar ways. Elderly residents, renters. A single mother who left after her child's swing set was deemed a structural hazard. They were running a pattern, a system, and it was about to fall apart. We weren't just fighting for our home anymore. We were fighting to expose something bigger, a system hidden in plain sight, dressed up in neighborhood niceties and newsletters, but fueled by fear, silence, and power plays. And Karen, she had no idea who she'd picked a fight with. Because what she didn't know, what very few people in our neighborhood knew, was that my wife, Marissa Holt, had once taken down an entire shell corporation funneling laundered money through 4 states, that she'd led joint investigations with the ATF, IRS, and DOJ, that she didn't just prosecute cases, she built them from scratch. So when the pressure hit its peak, she stopped reacting and started building. First, we assembled the evidence wall. It took up the entire guest room. On the left wall, every letter, violation, and fine we'd received, arranged chronologically. On the right, copies of HOA bylaws, past and present, with sections highlighted, annotated, and cross-referenced. In the center, a photo grid of Karen, Mark, the other board members, and key timestamps, like when certain rules changed and who voted. The centerpiece, a flowchart labeled Motive plus Money. Marissa connected the dots between the April bylaw amendments, the Green Growth Plan, and the real estate flyers quietly circulating certain homes. She uncovered email chains, thanks to a subpoena-ready FOIA request sent to the property management company, proving Karen had been coordinating compliance actions with the HOA lawyer without majority board approval. That's illegal under our charter. She even found a city zoning request that had been pre-submitted months ago for a community expansion project that relied entirely on purchasing our property or acquiring it through enforcement lien and foreclosure. They were laying the groundwork before they ever spoke to us, but we had receipts. Step 2 was assembling allies. We reached out to the other 4 homeowners we'd quietly connected with: Debbie, Miguel, Nora, and Mrs. Edmonds, an 84-year-old widow who was threatened with a daily fine for her non-regulation shutters. We invited them over for tea. They came cautiously, nervous, eyes darting like they were afraid the HOA had installed listening devices in their car tires. Marissa handed each of them a binder, custom, indexed, easy to understand. "This is what they did to you," she said, "and this is how it violates your HOMEO. Unit protections under Civ Code 4R 4600, 4R 5105, and FAR 6000. Dead silence." Then Nora whispered, "I thought I was going crazy." We formed a quiet coalition. The 5 we called ourselves. We divided tasks. Debbie, a retired teacher, gathered testimonies from other residents who'd moved away. Miguel, a tech guy, compiled metadata from public posts and internal emails. Nora scanned documents for irregularities. Mrs. Edmonds, God bless her, called the local newspaper. Marissa coached them, taught them how to file complaints, prepare statements, and recognize retaliatory behavior. She wasn't just building a case. She was building a team. Then came the linchpin: legal escalation. Marissa wrote a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, citing intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment under civil harassment order statutes, unlawful lien threats, improper rulemaking procedures violating Davis-Sterling Act. We sent copies to the HOA legal counsel, the city attorney's office, the local news outlet's legal desk, every board member, the property management company, and at the top of each envelope, Marissa's federal prosecutor credentials. They flinched. Hard. The next board meeting, which usually had a sleepy 5-person attendance, was packed, standing room only. Over 50 neighbors showed up, many holding copies of the documents we'd distributed the night before. Marissa didn't speak at first. She let others talk. Debbie stood and read her testimony. Miguel presented a slideshow comparing old and new bylaw documents, showing dates, metadata, and inconsistencies. Mrs. Edmonds read her letter aloud. "I have lived here for 30 years. My shutters have been here for 29 of them." The board squirmed. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Mark sat in the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Finally, Marissa stood. She spoke calmly. "Since moving here, my husband and I have been harassed, fined, and isolated. Not because we broke rules, but because someone decided we were in the way of a development project. I have evidence of bylaw tampering, improper zoning coordination, and board actions taken without vote or quorum. And I intend to file a civil complaint unless this stops immediately." Then she placed a single sheet of paper on the table, a formal notice of intent to litigate. That night, we got an email from 2 board members, not Karen. They apologized, said they were unaware of what Karen had been doing, that they wanted to hold a special meeting to review the violations and pause all enforcement actions pending independent review. It wasn't a win, yet, but it was a crack in the wall. In the days that followed, the community began to shift. People who hadn't spoken to us in months stopped by with pies, flowers, or quiet nods. A teenager left a note in our mailbox. "Thanks for helping my grandma." A city council member replied to our zoning complaint and promised to send an auditor. We were still being watched, still under pressure, but the fear? That was theirs now. Because the moment we stopped being their target and became their opposition, backed by law, evidence, and community, that's when their game began to collapse. The special meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, August 18th at 6:00 p.m. in the community clubhouse, a beige stucco building with mismatched chairs and a slightly crooked American flag. By 5:40, the room was full. By 5:50, it was standing room only. By 6:00, they had to open the sliding partition to accommodate the crowd bleeding into the adjacent billiards area. People brought copies of emails, photos of their violations, and handwritten notes on HOA letterhead. Someone brought a projector, someone else brought snacks. It wasn't a gathering, it was a reckoning. And Karen? She was already seated at the front behind the folding table lined with plastic name, mistake by Dadson. Placards, wearing a crisp navy blazer, not a hair out of place, clutching her gavel like a weapon of last resort. Mark sat 2 rows back, arms crossed, sunglasses on, indoors. The meeting began. The acting board president, a man named Carl Peterson, opened with a carefully worded statement. Due to recent community concerns and the volume of questions raised regarding enforcement practices and bylaw modifications, we are convening this special session for open review. All fines are temporarily suspended pending evaluation. Then he looked over at Marissa. We'll begin with public comments. Ms. Holt? She stood, calm, measured, in control. No dramatic speech, no theatrics, just facts. She distributed copies of a packet, 70 pages, color-coded, tabbed. It included a timeline of our citations showing an exact correlation with Karen's committee actions. Copies of bylaw changes filed with the city, highlighting where quorum and notice violations occurred. A side-by-side analysis of property liens initiated under Karen's oversight, and a statement of complaint signed by 7 other homeowners alleging coordinated intimidation and retaliatory enforcement. Marissa spoke like she was in a courtroom, not angry, not vindictive, just surgical. This is not about landscaping. This is not about rain barrels. This is about abuse of authority, targeted harassment, and a pattern of retaliatory governance that violates both our HOA charter and state law. She placed the final page down, a formal request for Karen's immediate suspension, pending investigation. Gasps, whispers. Karen shifted in her seat, cleared her throat. With all due respect, she said sharply, this is nothing more than an orchestrated smear campaign by individuals who... But she was cut off by Debbie. I'm sorry, respectfully. I have a copy of the letter Karen sent me last spring, claiming my flower pots were creating visual clutter that diminished neighborhood value. She fined me $600 for those. They're ceramic, and I'm disabled. Another voice. She told me my wind chimes were disruptive to Harmon. That's not even a rule. Then Miguel stood up. He'd connected the metadata on enforcement letters sent through the HOA's system. Every single citation that month had come from the same IP address. Karen's. One by one, neighbors began speaking, telling their stories, sharing evidence, holding up pictures, emails, voicemail recordings. It wasn't chaos. It was clarity. And every minute, Karen shrank smaller behind her gavel. Then came the moment no one expected. A man in a gray suit stood up near the back, introduced himself as Adam Reyes, legal counsel for the City Zoning Compliance Office. He'd received Marissa's letter. He'd reviewed the development proposals submitted by the HOA. He'd investigated the premature application filed to redevelop problem properties. That request, he said, was submitted using signatures not backed by board approval. It named properties that had not been notified. It constitutes zoning fraud and will be referred to the state licensing board. Dead silence. Then he turned toward Karen. If you are the originator of that submission, I strongly advise you to consult legal representation. Karen's face drained of color. The vote to suspend her came 15 minutes later. Carl didn't even need a show of hands. He just asked for those in favor to say, aye. The room roared. Only 2 voices dissented, Karen's and Mark's. She was suspended pending investigation, stripped of all authority, and barred from entering any other resident's property under HOA auspices. Mark, meanwhile, was reported to the local sheriff's department for brandishing a weapon on private property without cause. He was escorted from the meeting by 2 off-duty officers, neighbors as it turned out, who'd been quietly watching from the back. We walked home that night through a gauntlet of thank yous and nods. People we barely knew handed us warm muffins, little notes, even hugs. Sandra from next door came over 2 days later with her teenage sons and apologized. I didn't know how bad it was, she said. I just didn't want to be next. We understood. Fear makes cowards of decent people. That's why power, real power, has to be held accountable. A month later, the HOA voted in a new committee. Debbie took over community beautification. Miguel joined the bylaws revision task force. Nora became board secretary. Mrs. Edmonds, God bless her, became the new ARC chair, with one promise: no more weaponized shrubbery. As for us, the fines were waived, the violations expunged, the rain barrels stayed. So did the butterflies. So did we. And Karen? She was last seen selling her home quietly in late September, moving out before sunrise. No goodbye, just a for sale sign and silence. The morning Karen moved out, the air felt different, crisper, quieter, like the neighborhood itself had exhaled. She didn't make a scene. No farewell barbecue, no lingering glances, just a moving truck that pulled up before dawn and was gone by mid-afternoon. 1 minute, the white Mazda was still in her driveway. The next, the house stood hollow. I'd be lying if I said it felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt necessary. What she tried to build wasn't just about us, it was about control, over people, over space, over the quiet dignity of everyday life. And what she lost wasn't just her position on the board, it was her grip on a community that had woken up. In the weeks after the meeting, something strange and beautiful began to happen. People started talking again. Neighbors who had kept to themselves began waving on their morning walks. Lawn chairs appeared on porches. Debbie organized a cleanup Saturday, and over 20 people showed up with gloves and rakes. Miguel set up a shared Google Drive where residents could track HOA activity transparently. Nora rewrote the bylaws, this time with public review, and for the first time in years, the community felt communal. We even held our first neighborhood cookout in the park near the Butterfly Guillaume, in Marissa's idea. It was casual, last minute, a few folding tables, hot dogs, 3 kinds of potato salad, and a lot of cautious laughter. But it was healing. We set up a sign near the garden, the Holt Garden, a place for quiet resistance. People smiled at it, took pictures. One little girl asked if she could plant sunflowers next spring. Of course we said yes. As for Mark Elbridge, the sheriff's office filed a misdemeanor weapons misconduct report. The charges didn't stick. First-time offender, lack of full draw, but he was formally reprimanded and lost his private security license. A letter from his lawyer arrived a few weeks later, quietly withdrawing from any future HOA involvement. He hasn't been seen since. Karen's house sold to a young couple, Rhea and Dev, who moved in with a golden retriever puppy and more questions than complaints. Their first request? Is it okay if we paint the mailbox teal? We smiled. Paint it gold if you want. Just be kind. The violations that once felt like shackles, rain barrels, signage, plants, so-called visual clutter, are now quietly celebrated. There's a new community bulletin board that features a Garden of the Month. Guess who won the first one? We didn't submit ourselves. Someone else did. And the kicker? The new HOA president added a special clause to the bylaws. Environmental improvements such as rain barrels, bee boxes, pollinator gardens, and native landscaping shall be encouraged and protected, provided they are maintained in good faith. We framed that page. It hangs in our entryway now. Right next to a picture of Marissa, standing in front of the community clubhouse, holding her binder like a shield. People still ask us what changed. And the truth is, everything and nothing. The street still looks the same, the houses haven't moved, the trees still whistle when the wind comes through, but the feel of the neighborhood, shifted. It became a place where people speak up, where no one looks away when something feels wrong, where even the smallest voices know they have weight. And that matters, because it's not about rain barrels, or mailbox colors, or whether you plant snap peas in your front yard. It's about the freedom to live quietly, honestly, without fear of someone misusing a rulebook to make your life miserable. We weren't the first targets, and we probably won't be the last. But we were the first to say enough, loud enough for everyone to hear. I still walk the path where Mark gripped his weapon that night. I do it deliberately, not out of spite, out of memory, because fear feeds on silence, but justice lives in truth, and truth needs to be walked, lived, remembered. The garden's still blooming. Betty, our loudest hen, just laid her 500th egg. Marissa made a little crown out of cardboard and set it on the fence post like a trophy. The neighbors laugh every time they see it. It's ridiculous. It's joyful. It's ours. The HOA still exists, yes, but now it works for the neighborhood, not over it. That's the real victory. Not that Karen left, but that her grip did. So if you're watching this from a neighborhood that feels just a little too quiet, where letters arrive without names, where rules shift in the shadows and good people feel small, let this be your sign. You're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. You don't need to shout, you just need to start. One record, one page, one neighbor, one law. Because bullies hide behind policies. But truth has nothing to hide behind. They tried to bury us in citations and silence, but we grew a garden and a community right through the cracks. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever been silenced by a system, targeted for standing your ground or made to feel small over something that mattered to you, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever had to stand up to an HOA or someone who thought they held all the power? And if you believe in communities built on fairness, not fear, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Because the more we speak up, the less they can hide.